Okay, so earlier on we made some radio buttons and we can put dots in boxes and make selections. So for each radio button we had two possible selections. Now, the issue with that is we can make the selections, but it doesn't actually update the label. So it just continually remains at 0. So when we choose Core i5, the price doesn't update. Core i7, NVIDIA, AMD. So we need something to update these prices. So when we change from Core i5 to Core i7, this price is going to change. And the same if we change the graphics card, we want the price to update automatically. So as I said before, we try to define all of these functions at the top. So underneath where I did my login window, I'm going to now define a new function to help me grab the selection and then update that label with whatever price I want that label to display for me. So we do it the same way as we did the previous function by choosing DEF, and then again we can give it whatever name we want to give it. So because it's for my radio button selection, I'm going to just call it cell. Don't forget to open and close brackets and put the colon. Now, it should push it 4 spaces again in from the side. If it doesn't, it's probably because you've forgotten to put the semicolon in. And all we want to do at this point is create a variable so we know what the selection contains. So I'm just going to call mine selection, okay? But it doesn't really matter. You can call it, again, whatever you like, as long as it makes sense to you. Now we want it to be a string. So we start with str, open a bracket. And what we want to do is we want to get the variable that we defined earlier on that's now stored in that radio button, and we just use .get for that. Okay, now don't forget, because we have opened a bracket, we need to close a bracket, and we also need a couple of open close brackets just here as well. So we got 2 sets of open and close brackets on here. So that's going to have a look at the radio button that's been selected, and it's then going to update the label for the text accordingly. So earlier on, we had a label. Now, if we scroll back down, this label processor price that we labeled, this is the one that has the text just with 0, with the number 0. This is the one we want to update. So it's LBL proc price. So you may have called yours something else, but this is the label that we're looking to update, okay, which is this one just here. Okay, so both these radio buttons are using the same label, so that's fine, okay? So if we whip back up to the top, we want to make sure we're updating the proper label. Okay, now we don't need to create a new label, we just use something called config, which will just basically update the text that's on that existing label. So we just need to tell it now what we want to change the text to. And in this case, it's going to be selection, which we defined in the line above. So if we scroll back down to where we defined the first of our radio buttons. Now mine's around about line 66, yours might be slightly different, but it'll be around there if you've been following these tutorials. Okay, so it's called rad proc, and my first one is called Core i5. Okay, and what I want to do here then is I already defined a value here of 45, and on my second radio button I already defined a value of 65. So what we've just written in that function is it knows that this one's 45 and it knows that this one's 65, and we've just defined a variable called selection to grab this number, store it in that variable. What we need to do now is tell it to run that command. So at the end, just before the final bracket, put a comma similar to what we did earlier on, and we say command equals, and it's whatever we called it, in our case was cell. Okay, so in theory now when we run this, what we should find is when we select Core i5, it's pulling that number from here, this value. And when we select Core i7, it will pull through the 65, but we need to make sure that we've put command equals cell against Core i7 as well. Otherwise, it doesn't know where to store this number 65. Okay, so just let's run that again. So Core i5 is £45, Core i7 is now £65. Okay, so we do the same thing for the graphics card, but obviously we don't want to call it cell. We want to call it something different, but the code is going to be virtually identical to what we just did above just here. So we could copy this and paste it in, but we don't want to call it cell. We need to make sure it's called something else because it's going to be storing something different, and we don't want to call it selection because we've already used selection up here. So we can just add a 1 so that we know it's cell 1, a selection 1, or you could call it cell 2, or whatever you want to call it. You name these things yourself. Okay, but we don't want to update this label. Okay, so this is the label we want to update for the video card. So if I go back up to here, okay, and I want to configure the text on the video price, and we want the text to be this variable here, which in this case is going to be selection 1, not this one, because it's different. Okay, so we've got a selection defined, which is going to store a string, which is just going to get the var that we defined earlier on, and then it's going to update the processor price with whatever selection on the radio button, and then we're going to do the same thing again for cell 1, but we're going to call this selection 1. It's going to do the same thing, go and get the radio button, and then display the value in a variable called selection 1 on the video price label. So let's just see. What we need to do now is make sure we go back to where we have set up these radio buttons here, and we do the same as before. So this one will be command equals cell 1, and then exactly the same thing here just before the final bracket will be command equals cell 1. Okay, and then when we run it, what we should find is this time when we choose NVIDIA or AMD, okay, so they're just jumping between the prices that we set in the values. Okay, and now we've got some numbers, we can think about how we can calculate that into a final price a little bit later on. Okay, in the next video, we're going to look at how to do the same sort of thing by getting whatever's in this list and displaying that over here with a price.